I extend a very warm welcome to you who are attending this conference. I am flooded with many happy memories of my time at your second Spanish conference in 2015 in Valencia. And I am very grateful to the organizers of this conference for this opportunity to address you, even though I am speaking to you from so far away. Admittedly, this has saved me the ordeal of a 50-plus hour long round trip from Auckland to Barcelona. But I also consider that I, and narrative therapy itself, have a debt of gratitude to acknowledge to our Spanish host culture, language, and literature. After all, the man who invented fiction, the man who changed forever the way people have been represented from caricature to character, lived and died on this soil of yours. I am quoting Eggington. Something strange happened in the winter of 1605. At the heart of the world's most powerful empire, in a time of economic decline and political stagnation, word started to spread about, of all things, a book. The dealers quickly sold out. Those who could read passed increasingly threadbare copies from hand to hand, and those who could not read began to congregate in inns, village squares, and taverns to hear the pages read aloud. This fiction began somewhere in La Mancha, in a place whose name I do not care to remember. A gentleman lived not long ago. I am referring to the world literature's most recognizable protagonist, Don Quixote, and next to the Bible, the best-selling book in the history of published texts. Of course, the author was Miguel de Cervantes. His book was entitled The Ingenious Gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha. I am quoting again. Cervantes' brilliance at creating characters that feel real depended in part on his rich descriptions and his attentiveness to their voices. But underlying all his characters was his fascination with how different people might experience the same situation and how real emotions from laughter to despair can flow from that experience. My thinking of late will explain why I feel such gratitude to your land, literature, and language. I have concluded that narrative therapy might best be thought of as the means by which the moral character of another is revealed to all concerned. Cervantes made this possible. I hope that explains the depth of my gratitude. I wanted to speak in general of what I refer to as a history for the future, as well as reimagining narrative therapy. When Michael and I were planning to start all over again, just before he tragically died, Michael spoke to me of returning to our historical sources, whereas I spoke of new sources. There was no dispute. This was typical of how we complemented one another. What I have to say in the time I have to say it will go from one to the other. But first, let me tell of an uncanny incident that happened 3 years ago. On a visit to Auckland in August 1985, Michael agreed to substitute for me in a series of classes I was giving to the trainees in psychiatry at the medical school, University of Auckland. I suspected that my colleagues and their students would be extremely interested in his evolving practice with those who suffer from psychotic experience. I was curious how he would be received in Auckland psychiatry. Although it was merely a 2-hour lecture, Michael represented his practice by means of his customary eloquence, as well as theorizing it as he went along. The blend of the two strands of his presentation were, to my way of thinking, just about right. There was considerable interest expressed, and the professor, Bob Large, then brought the session to an end by commenting at some length about how respectful Michael had been. From there, we had to walk a block and then across Grafton Bridge to catch our homeward bound bus. Michael fell silent on leaving the medical school, as if he were spellbound. I thought it unwise to interrupt him, as it was clear to me that he was deep in thought. I certainly was wondering why. Was he disappointed with his presentation? Had he felt injured by an innocent remark of one of the students? Or had something bothered him that I had entirely overlooked? When he did break his silence, I was so aware of that very moment that I could return to the exact physical spot, approximately 6 paces from the streetlights. He turned to me, pulling himself free of his reverie, and completed his internal conversation to the generous comments about his respectfulness. I believe I am quoting him verbatim because Michael spoke in the manner of someone who had reached their final conclusion. It is not a matter of us being respectful. It is a matter of our clients experiencing our respect for them. I cannot recall if we spoke further about this at the time. I think we just both fell silent, navigating the rush hour pedestrian traffic as we found our way to our bus stop. But I can assure you I had cause over the years to return to and reconsider this time and time again. How can our clients feel our respect for them? And I believe this is at the heart of many of the practices that distinguish narrative therapy practice. That night, I had an evening meeting with a family and their 10-year-old daughter, a follow-up for our only other meeting a month before. Michael, given his vast experience with young women and their families who had suffered from anorexia nervosa, willingly agreed to join us. He asked that he be an observer when I told him that Lee Marie had gone from our first meeting after not having eaten for 3 years and immediately had started to eat once again. The next day, her parents had been overjoyed to tell me about this dramatic turn of events, as her hospitalization had been imminent. Her grandfather, oddly enough, had rung me on behalf of his granddaughter, Lee Marie. This was the first and last time a grandfather was ever to engage me on behalf of a grandchild. Although I was never to meet him in person, I was, in a manner of speaking, to meet him again 29 years later on April 5th, 2013 at Te Noko Kotahitanga, which translates to the House of the Respectful Heart, the Marae, or meeting house, at the Unitech Institute of Technology, where I was then teaching. I was invited to a ritual that had been going on for some years in the undergraduate Bachelor's of Social Practice degree. Prior to their first placement, the entire contingent of second-year students, 100 plus, spent 2 days and a night on the marae, or meeting place, preparing themselves individually and collectively for what lay ahead of them as apprentices in their respective avocations. I was asked to do a live interview in a very specific format, which would begin, "Why are you so proud of the problem you somehow or other overcame?" My questions would be typed up and projected onto an overhead screen as we proceeded. After the interview was completed, I would then attempt to explain my practice and respond to any queries. This was something I looked forward to in order to demonstrate a respectful practice that I hoped might live up to Michael's concerns expressed 29 years previously, to have another experience our respect for them, in this instance, a fellow student. However, I had a great deal on my mind that was intruding on the pleasure I might have anticipated. That very day was the 5th anniversary of Michael's death in 2008. As always, he was very much on my mind, especially how he affected the people he met. And in particular, I was remembering Michael joining me in 1985 at the final interview with Lee Marie and her family. Lee Marie's father had phoned soon afterwards to ask me what Michael's sport was. Somewhat baffled by the query, I asked him why he wanted to know. "We thought so highly of him. We own a sports store and he looked so athletic. We were wondering if we might mail him some presents." I informed him he was a swimmer, but there was no need to post their gifts. as I would be going over to Adelaide in a few weeks' time. I recall Michael receiving a very large package of towels and swimming goggles, probably enough to last him through a few swimming seasons. I was reminiscing about this as I cycled the 20 minutes from home to the Unique Tech campus. The interview was to begin after lunch. I was speaking to a colleague over lunch who had her back to a woman who was seeking my attention. In fact, she seemed troubled. "Did you want to speak to me?" She seemed somewhat relieved and asked me, "Do you live in Balmoral?" "Yes," I replied, wondering why she might ask such a question. "I met you there 29 years ago when I was 10. I stared at her, but she, of course, was no longer the 10-year-old girl and was as such unrecognizable. "What is your name?" "Lee Marie." Before she could continue, I interrupted and proposed her surname. She was stunned, and we both fell silent momentarily. Lee Marie then added, "My parents send their regards to you and want you to know they saved your and Michael's letters." I was also flummoxed when she went on to say, "It is because of you and Michael that I'm doing this degree." I realized that time was short and the afternoon interview was to begin in a few moments. I explained the prospect of such an interview. "Would you be willing for me to interview you for this purpose? Unlike any of your classmates, I was a witness 29 years ago to you overcoming a considerable problem." Lee Marie happily consented. I introduced Lee Marie to her 100-plus classmates and told of the unusual circumstances we had met 29 years before and how she had overcome what would have been regarded as an impossible problem to overcome in a single session. I also informed everyone that this was the 5th anniversary of Michael White's death. I also mentioned that she had told me her enrollment in this degree was, quotes, "because of meeting you and Michael." I told my audience that you are going to find out, too, that meeting also changed the course of my life, leading to 20 years of practice and thought in co-authoring a book, Biting the Hand That Starves You, Inspiring Resistance to Anorexia, Bulimia, in 2004. The following is an edited transcription of that interview. Why are you so proud of the problem from the past that you overcame somehow or other? Lee Marie. I think the most important thing is that I feel I have a life now. I am really proud of that, and I have a family, and I'm studying for this degree. I asked, do you consider if you hadn't overcome this problem from the past, it would have taken over your life? Lee Marie replied, yeah, definitely. Where do you guess it would have taken your life, too, if you hadn't overcome it? I was thinking about that today and got so upset thinking that I wouldn't be here alive. I asked, is the fact that you are here a testimony to you as a 10-year-old girl and your mother and your father and the family you come from? Definitely. If you could acknowledge your 10-year-old self for overcoming a problem that could have taken your life away from you before you had hardly lived it, what would you acknowledge your 10-year-old self for? She said, just to be thankful to that 10-year-old for overcoming it so she went on to lead the life I have led so far. It makes me really appreciate my life. Is there anything in particular that you would like to appreciate her for given you now have 29 years to look back on her life? Definitely the kids I've got today. They're the biggest things. And of course, meeting my partner. You may not be aware that the problem you overcame as a 10-year-old would have been regarded at that time almost impossible to overcome. What was so remarkable about you and the family you come from that you did so in merely 60 minutes? I definitely think having really strong parents and not putting me in hospital. Their will to keep me going was a big one, and also the help from your therapy. It all actually happened when we met. It came about from that. Can you trace the will you speak of in your mother and father to your grandparents in any way? I can, because it was actually my grandfather who noticed and pushed it. And he kept telling my family that something wasn't right. And so it was him who was very strong about not giving up. That was huge, and he phoned you. By any chance, were you the apple of your grandfather's eye? I think so, yes. Can you tell us a story that might convey that to us? Yeah, definitely. Him having to sit around and watching me dance around his living room for half an hour, he definitely suffered through that. Can you remember as a little girl the look in his eye when you were dancing around his living room? He always had a glitter in his eyes. He was always smiling. Are there any stories that you know of from your paternal family that are told about how they don't give up when the going gets tough? Yes, she said, there were bad financial times and they just kept on going. Nothing gets them down and they do overcome it in time and just think of other ways. I've seen it. They can be very strong in that way. Can you tell me something you have witnessed in this regard? They lost completely everything and they built it up again to be even better. They were going through a lot of stress. If your grandfather was here and I asked him this question, can you guess what he might have said? Lee Marie's grandfather, were you at all surprised when you learned that the apple of your eye, your 10-year-old granddaughter, overcame a problem thought to be almost impossible in no more than 60 minutes? How do you guess he would have answered? I think he wouldn't be surprised. No, I'm sure he wouldn't be surprised. Can I ask him another question? Lee Marie's grandfather, why were you not surprised when, to be honest, I could not quite believe it when I learned what Lee Marie and her family had gone and done immediately upon leaving my office? What would you think he might say in reply? I think he knows we are fighters. Yeah, fighters. He has seen that nothing actually will stop us. Is that fighting spirit reflected in the way your family has engaged in athletics? Absolutely. My father and brothers have excelled. They almost went to the Olympics and excelled in professional sports. What are your recollections all those 29 years ago of meeting me in Balmoral? I remember your house, and I remember some of those exercises you gave me. I also remember my older brothers moaning about having to come along with Mom, Dad, and me. Yeah, our whole family. I remember it. It's just so clear in my mind. Do you by any chance remember the questions I asked you 29 years ago? You asked a lot about my Nana, a lot of historical questions about my family. My Nana was a giver, and she was always give a lot. We touched on that a lot, and we touched on the problem, anorexia. Yeah, we externalized it, and we touched on how if I managed to eat my lunch or not, I should do certain things. And you came up with some exercises. I had to have a plate, and if I couldn't eat the food, I had to scrape it into the rubbish bin and pretend that was anorexia making me do it. And I was beating it, so it wasn't beating me. I just thought that I was dealing to it. You are not beating me, I am beating you. Otherwise, I had my dad sitting next to me, forcing me to eat and me vomiting. Under those circumstances of forced feeding, did you feel that you had failed your family? I did. I felt like I let them down and that I couldn't fight it. But this way I could see it. When the problem now occurred, I knew, oh no, here it comes. I've got to try and fight it. You say that I could see it now. Before that, was the problem invisible to you? I was known as a little girl with anorexia, so I was just like that. That was how I lived. Before I saw you, I had it for 3 years. Yeah, I remember that meeting, and we all sat there, and my mom mentioned babies, and you told me that when I was older, that anorexia would forbid me having children. And then I realized that, and we got onto that subject and dug down into it deeper. I think that was the turning point, really. Yes, I love little kids. When you look into the eyes of your daughters, does that justify the choice you made 29 years ago to take your life back from anorexia? It does. I haven't really thought about it so deeply before. When I came into university today, it really hit me. I realized I might not have been alive today and would not have had my precious kids. It makes it real special that I did overcome it. When you When they grow up to their late teens or early 20s, and you want to send them off into the world with the knowledge of your will and that of your family, will you tell them about this conversation we are having today? Definitely. I will tell them how precious they are and how I really beat anorexia was to have them as my children. And I want them to know how special they are. Do you think when they are older, they will cherish this loving of yours? I hope they do, yeah. No, I think they will cherish my loving of them. When we talked over lunch, you talked of your paternal grandmother as a giving person. Do you think some of that was passed down to you? Definitely, I'm a lot like her. Is she still alive? No. Did she live long enough for you to know her? Yes, definitely. As you know, this marae is called the House of the Respectful Heart. Do you think your grandmother had the quality of a respectful heart? Definitely. Do you think in due course it will manifest itself in your conversation with clients? I certainly hope so. Tell me, if you will, after you started eating after our first meeting, what came next? She said, hard times. It was very, very hard, but I knew I had the skills and knowledge that was put in place. It was a long process. I can still say that today I have a little bit of anorexia, but I know that it will never get to that stage again. I know how to stop it, so yeah. What contribution do you figure your mom and dad made over those hard times? They would always be supporting me. They would always be looking out when times were rough. They knew when anorexia was about, and at those times they were aware of it. They comforted me at night when I couldn't sleep. How do you see all these things are linked up with your decision to do a social work degree? Just by me overcoming it, the anorexia, I think it made me stronger in a way because I knew I could make a difference in people's lives if I could make such a difference in my own. You started practicing social work on your own life at, she said, 10. Say in several years' time, you graduate and you go to the graduation ceremony in the town hall. You walk across when your name is called and you receive your degree, and the director shakes your hand. When you walk down from the stage, who are you going to speak to first? She said, myself. I'll say to myself, I've done it. I'll be real happy doing what I finally wanted to do after so many years. It will be a great joy. Say your grandmother was a witness and she could speak to you on this occasion. Can you guess what she might say to you? I just know she'd be really happy that I had done something I wanted to do. If you said this to her, Nana, I know you don't know this, but in so many ways, I believe I am living forward into my professional life what you did as a volunteer. What do you guess she would say on this occasion? She would agree. She would definitely agree. She was very kind-hearted. Do you think she would have tears in her eyes? Oh, definitely. Do you have any questions you might like to ask me about our meetings and how this led to develop anti-anorexia and biting the hand that starves you, inspiring anorexia bulimia? How did your work go? It went downhill after you. No one ever walked out after one session and freed their lives in due course of anorexia. At the time, I only ate a pea, but to go out that night after our meeting and eat some chicken, I made that stand. It was amazing. It is so great to meet you today because you led me to 20 years of this work, and it all began in such a modest way. It is so wonderful to meet you again on this very day, and so unbelievable. Same for me, but I just wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank you. Yeah, if you didn't do it, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be either. I mean it even if for me it wasn't a matter of life or death when we met all those 29 years ago. The interview also reminds me of therapy as a gift exchange rather than a benevolent donation of one who ministers to another, and that Michael and I used that very term in the very first words we had spoken and written about narrative therapy several weeks before at the 5th Australian Family Therapy Conference in Sydney. Let me take up what I'm referring to as a history for the future by way of a preliminary discussion of insider witnessing practices, which for me is the next iteration of seeking a means which is currently being tried out in North Dakota and soon in South America and Portugal and Turkey to live up to the concern Michael stated to me in 1985. How do our clients experience our respect for them? Or, my more general concern, how do we go about revealing the other's moral character to all concerned? As a counterpoint to Michael's outsider witnessing practices, which engage strangers as witnesses, insider witnessing practices engage intimate others. In this case, the therapist, when she or he feels they know their client sufficiently well to portray their moral character. I am using Richard Sennett's brief description of moral characters having, quotes, the capacity to move another. Both witnessing practices show how the witness has been moved and by doing so registers the moral character of the client. But they go about this very differently. I do not have more time here than to provide you with what Tom Carlson and I are referring to as preliminary results of the first 16 essays of insider witnessing practices conducted in the MA, now PhD program in couple and family therapy at North Dakota State University since January 25th, 2015. With permission of your conference organizers, Tom and I will forward you drafts of the first 3 papers, which are now in press. All I can do is whet your appetite with a brief description. Here it is. The clients who have participated in this practice have evaluated the Act 1, on average a 90-minute interview, to be equivalent in value to at least 15 to 20 sessions of the narrative family therapy they have previously received with their student therapists. However, there is one unanimous qualification. Everyone insisted on the one hand that even this number was likely an underestimate, and on the other, that they would never have made the dramatic changes that occurred in the Act 2, no matter how many sessions they eventually would have had. Even more surprising for us, since this took place within the context of a family therapy training program, was the student therapist evaluations. They evaluated their participation in the insider witnessing process, which for them lasted on average between 3 and 5 hours, was equivalent in value to 1 to 2 full years of training in the family therapy training program. In terms of reimagining the future, I also wish to mention another pedagogy we are trying out in North America and Denmark, called exemplary tales as pedagogy. Here, contrary to maps, students learn to map various practitioners by way of their exemplary tales, which are written in order to show how they got from here to there, rather than telling. They apprentice themselves to the exemplary practice of others, not only to emulate them, but more importantly, to learn how to map their own practice. In such a pedagogy, a student becomes a mapper rather than turning a map into an app and becoming what Jaron Larnier refers to as, quotes, being locked into the inalterable software of the app's designer. Once again, we would be glad to have you read drafts of these papers, which are being prepared for publication. I want to remind you of the closest Michael and I ever got to a manifesto. In 1992, we wrote, however, we are drawing attention to the fact that one of the aspects associated with this work that is of central importance to us is the spirit of adventure. We aim to preserve this adventure. I ask all of you to re-engage wholeheartedly with this spirit, which is the lifeblood of narrative therapy. Without it, it will surely perish. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you.